There was a time in ancient history when a powerful African kingdom marched north. They crossed the deserts of Nubia, they entered the Nile Valley, and then they did something almost unbelievable. They conquered Egypt, not as robbers, not as short-term invaders, but as pharaohs. For almost 100 years, kings from a land far south of Egypt ruled one of the oldest and most respected civilizations in the world. They rebuilt ancient temples, they brought a divided Egypt back together. They ruled a large empire that stretched from central Sudan all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. Ancient Egyptian writing tells us about their victories. Their royal pyramids still stand above their tombs. Archaeologists have found whole cities built by these rulers. And yet, outside of historians and people who love ancient history, very few people know their story. These rulers were the Kushites. Today, the land of Kush is mostly in modern Sudan, along the middle part of the Nile River. For thousands of years, this area was like a bridge between Africa south of the Sahara and the Mediterranean world. Gold, ivory, ebony wood, incense, animals, iron, and many other goods passed through this land. These trade routes connected people who lived far apart, separated by deserts, mountains, and long distances. The Kushites were not cut off from the world. They lived at the meeting point of great regions and cultures. Their story is not about a small, forgotten tribe. It is the story of one of Africa's greatest empires. This empire was strong enough to conquer Egypt itself. It brought back many old Egyptian traditions. It challenged the mighty Assyrian Empire, and it left behind more pyramids than Egypt. Yet somehow, most people never learn about these great achievements. So how did a kingdom that once ruled the land of the pharaohs almost disappear from popular memory? To answer that, we must travel south, far past the great temples of Luxor, past Aswan, past the first cataract of the Nile. We must go into a land where civilization had already been growing for thousands of years. Long before Kush became an empire, for many people, ancient history along the Nile begins and ends with Egypt. But the Nile does not stop at Egypt. It continues for thousands of miles beyond Egypt's southern border. There, thin strips of green farmland follow the river through dry and difficult land. Around the river are deserts, rocky hills, and grasslands that only grow during certain seasons. Without the Nile, big civilizations would have been almost impossible there. But with the Nile, kingdoms grew and became powerful. Long before Kush became famous, the Egyptians called this region Nubia. Nubia was not an empty land. It was home to many cultures with histories that went far back into ancient times. To Egypt, Nubia was very important. Its mountains had rich gold mines. Its trade roads connected Egypt with Central Africa. Its forests gave valuable wood. Its hunters captured giraffes, leopards, monkeys, and elephants. Its traders carried ivory, incense, ostrich feathers, and precious stones. For many centuries, Egyptian pharaohs moved south into Nubia. They built forts, temples, and government centers there. Sometimes Egypt conquered Nubia. Sometimes Egypt traded with Nubia. Sometimes Egypt made agreements with Nubian leaders. Often, all three things happened at the same time. This long relationship changed both Egypt and Nubia. Egyptian religion spread into Nubia. Building styles crossed borders. Royal ceremonies influenced Nubian rulers. Writing systems were used, but Nubians did not lose who they were. Even when Egypt controlled parts of Nubia, Nubian traditions stayed alive. One of the first great Nubian kingdoms was Kerma. Around 2500 BC, Kerma grew into one of Africa's earliest great cities. Archaeologists have found huge mud brick buildings there. They have also found royal tombs, workshops, and signs of trade with faraway places. At its strongest, Kerma could rival Egypt. Some Egyptian records describe Kerma as a dangerous enemy that could threaten southern Egypt. But later, during Egypt's new kingdom, the balance changed. Starting around the 1500s BC, powerful Egyptian pharaohs pushed deep into Nubia. Egyptian governors ruled much of the region. Temples for Amun and other Egyptian gods were built along the Nile. For several centuries, Kush lived under the strong influence of Egypt. But strangely, this helped Kush become great later. Egyptian rule did not destroy Nubian culture. Instead, it brought ideas and systems that Kushite rulers would later use for themselves. Nubian leaders learned Egyptian writing. They joined in temple rituals. They watched royal ceremonies. They became familiar with one of the oldest systems of kingship in the world. Then, when Egyptian power grew weak, those ideas did not disappear. They remained in Nubia, waiting. Around the 1000s BC, Egypt entered a very unstable time. The country was no longer united. Different kings ruled different parts of the land. Foreign influence became stronger. Egypt's unity began to break apart. But south of Egypt, something important was happening. The Kingdom of Kush began to rise. Its early center was Napata, near a sacred mountain, now called Jebel Barkal. Jebel Barkal stood tall above the land. Its steep sandstone cliffs could be seen from far away. To both Egyptians and Kushites, this mountain was very holy. It was closely connected with Amun, one of the most important gods in Egyptian religion. Temples were built at the foot of the mountain. Priests, pilgrims, and kings came there. The mountain became a symbol of power from the gods. The Kushite kings did not choose Napata by accident. They understood the power of symbols. By placing their royal center beside one of the holiest places along the Nile, they connected their own rule to traditions that were more than 1,000 years old. But Kush was not just a copy of Egypt. Its rulers mixed Egyptian ideas with strong Nubian customs. Royal women had very important roles in Kushite society. Queens, mothers, and sisters could influence politics, religion, and who became king. This was more power than women had in many other ancient societies. The title Kandake, often translated as queen or queen mother, later became famous around the Mediterranean world. For many generations, powerful royal women helped shape Kushite history. Kushite religion was also a mix of cultures. The Kushites worshipped Egyptian gods like Amun, Isis, Osiris, and Horus. But they also kept their own local beliefs. Their temples had their own special style. Their religious ceremonies showed both Egyptian influence and Nubian identity. This was one of Kush's greatest strengths. They could learn from others without losing themselves. At the same time, Kush became rich. Gold came from Nubian mines. Farms grew well along the fertile Nile floodplain. Trade caravans crossed deserts and connected Central Africa with Egypt and the Red Sea. Animals grazed on seasonal grasslands. Craftsmen made beautiful pottery, jewelry, bronze items, and luxury goods. Egypt's wealth depended a lot on the Mediterranean world. But Kush gained wealth from African trade routes that reached deep into the continent. It stood at one of the greatest trade crossroads in history. As Kush became richer, it also became stronger in war. The Kushite army had long experience defending deserts and river valleys. Its archers were especially famous. Ancient writers later praised Nubian bowmen as some of the best in the ancient world. Even Egyptian armies had used Nubian soldiers because they were so skilled. Now, those fighting skills served an independent kingdom. By the 700s BC, Egypt had become very divided. Instead of one strong kingdom, many local rulers fought for power. Some ruled parts of the Nile Delta, others controlled Upper Egypt. Priests also became very powerful. Egypt was weak and split apart. To the south, Kush watched carefully. Its kings saw more than a weak neighbor. They saw a chance. The ruler who took that chance was Piye, also known by the Greek version of his name, Pianki. His reign changed African history. Piye was not just a conqueror looking for land. From the writings that survive, it seems he believed he was protecting the old religious order. The most important record of his campaign still exists today. It is called the Victory Stela of Piye. This large stone inscription was found at Jebel Barkal. It is one of the greatest historical records from ancient Africa. Because of it, we can read Piye's own version of his conquest. Of course, royal writings often make kings sound greater than they were. Ancient rulers everywhere did this. But archaeology and other sources support the main events described in the inscription. According to the stela, Egyptian rulers in the north were fighting one another. A powerful prince named Tefnacht tried to take control over Lower Egypt. Some rulers joined him, others fought against him. The Nile Valley was falling into chaos. Piye decided to act. His army moved north along the Nile. The Kushites captured city after city. Some cities surrendered without a fight. Others had to be surrounded and taken by force. Many temple leaders welcomed Piye. He did not present himself as a foreign invader. He presented himself as the true protector of Amun and the ancient religious traditions that both Egyptians and Kushites respected. This was very important. Piye did not want to destroy Egyptian civilization. He wanted to restore what he believed Egypt had lost. His victory stela criticizes Egyptian rulers for ignoring religious duties and disrespecting sacred traditions. For Piye, war was not only about power, it was also about showing that he had the right to rule. One story shows how Piye wanted people to see him. After taking the city of Hermopolis, Piye reportedly refused to enter the stables until purification rituals were done. He believed the horses had been kept too close to sacred places. We cannot know if every detail happened exactly that way, but we do know what Piye wanted history to remember. He wanted to be seen not only as a conqueror, but as a righteous king who restored divine order. In the end, even Tefnacht accepted defeat. Piye did not stay in every northern city forever after the campaign, but Egypt's divided rulers recognized Kushite power. For the first time in history, a kingdom from farther south had united the Nile Valley under its authority. The age of Egypt's 25th dynasty had begun. The Kushites had become pharaohs of Egypt. Few civilizations have ever reversed history so completely. For centuries, Egypt had pushed power south into Nubia. Now the descendants of those southern kingdoms ruled Egypt from the throne of the pharaohs, and surprisingly, they became some of the strongest protectors of Egypt's oldest traditions. But new enemies were rising on the horizon. When Piye returned to Napata, after gaining power over Egypt, he made a choice that surprised many historians. He did not move his capital to Memphis. He did not leave Kush behind for Egypt. Instead, he went home. To us today, this may seem strange. Why would the ruler of one of the richest lands on earth stay hundreds of miles to the south? The answer tells us how the Kushite kings saw their empire. They were not Egyptians who happened to rule Nubia. They were not Nubians trying to erase Egypt. They believed the Nile Valley was one sacred world. It stretched from the heart of Kush all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. Napata remained the spiritual center of their dynasty. Egypt did not replace Kush. Egypt became part of Kush's kingdom. Piye's successors carried this idea even further. The most famous of them was Taharqa. Even today, Taharqa's name can be found on temples, statues, monuments and inscriptions in both Egypt and Sudan. His reign was the high point of Kushite power. Unlike many conquerors, Taharqa did not focus only on war. He spent huge resources on building. Old temples that had been ignored for generations were repaired. New holy places were built across the Nile Valley. Great columns, statues of gods, gateways and inscriptions showed his royal power from the Nile Delta to Nubia. At Karnak, one of Egypt's greatest temple complexes, Taharqa added impressive buildings that still survive today. His monuments were made to remind people of Egypt's greatest periods. This was not an accident. The Kushite kings admired Egypt's ancient past. They brought back old building styles, religious ceremonies, and royal traditions that many Egyptians had allowed to fade during years of division. Because of this, many historians call the 25th dynasty an Egyptian Renaissance. That means a rebirth of Egyptian culture. It is interesting because rulers born outside Egypt helped protect some of Egypt's oldest traditions. Religion was at the center of everything. The god Amun helped unite Kush and Egypt. Priests received strong support from the kings. Temples became wealthy again. Traditional rituals were performed with great care. To the Kushite kings, a pharaoh needed more than military power. A pharaoh also had a sacred duty. But while Taharqa was rebuilding temples along the Nile, another empire was growing far to the northeast. This empire was not interested in restoring old traditions. It wanted control. The Assyrian Empire became the strongest military power of its time. Its armies conquered Mesopotamia, Syria, Phoenicia, and much of the Near East. They used trained soldiers, cavalry, siege machines, and careful planning. City after city fell before them. Soon, Egypt stood in their path. For the first time, Kush faced an enemy unlike any it had ever met. A clash was coming. At first, Taharqa had some success. Ancient records show that Kushite and Egyptian forces supported rebellions against Assyrian power in the Levant. For a short time, it seemed possible that the Nile Valley might stop the Assyrian advance. But then Assyria sent its full strength. In 671 BC, King Esarhaddon launched a large invasion of Egypt. The campaign was carefully planned. Supply routes crossed the Sinai Desert. Skilled siege engineers traveled with the army. Elite soldiers moved toward the Nile Delta. The fighting was fierce. Eventually, Memphis fell. Taharqa retreated south. But the war was not over. A few years later, Taharqa returned and took back parts of Egypt. Then, Assyria invaded again. This time, the Assyrian king was Ashurbanipal. The struggle became one of the biggest conflicts of the ancient Near East. Records from both sides describe victories. Cities changed hands again and again. Local rulers changed sides depending on who seemed stronger. But in the end, Assyria had too many resources. The Kushite kings slowly pulled back south. By around 656 BC, Kush no longer controlled Egypt. After almost 100 years, the 25th dynasty ended. At first, this may sound like the end of Kush's story, but it was only the end of one chapter. Many ancient kingdoms were destroyed after losing a major war. Kush was different. It survived. Its rulers turned their attention back to Nubia. The kingdom did not collapse. Instead, it entered another important period. Over time, power moved farther south to the city of Meroe. This move made sense. Meroe was closer to African trade routes, but still connected to the Nile. The area around it had many useful resources. There was iron ore. There was wood for making charcoal. There was good farmland. There were trade routes reaching deep into Central Africa. These advantages helped Meroe become one of the greatest cities of ancient Africa. Greek and Roman visitors later wrote about its temples, palaces, workshops, and busy markets. Archaeology shows that much of this was true. Excavations have found strong evidence of iron production. Because of this, some historians called Meroe the Birmingham of ancient Africa. Today, scholars debate whether iron production was as huge as people once thought. But there is no doubt that metalworking was very important in Kush. Iron was used for weapons, farming tools, luxury goods, and trade products. It helped Kush stay wealthy for centuries after losing Egypt. The royal family also continued one of the most famous traditions of the Nile world. They built pyramids. Most people think of pyramids only as Egyptian, but the largest group of pyramids in the Nile Valley is actually in modern Sudan. More than 200 Kushite pyramids have been found. That is more than the number of surviving royal pyramids in Egypt. Kushite pyramids look different from the famous pyramids at Giza. They are usually smaller, steeper, and narrower. They were built at places like El Kuru, Nuri, and Meroe. They served as royal tombs for generations of kings and queens. Many still rise above the desert today. Under these pyramids, archaeologists have found beautiful burial rooms. They contain inscriptions, jewelry, weapons, pottery, and luxury goods. These discoveries show a civilization that was connected to Egypt, but also clearly had its own identity. Royal women continued to hold great power. Some Kandakis ruled with strong authority. One of the most famous moments came much later, when Rome expanded into the region. After Egypt became part of the Roman Empire, Roman power reached Nubia around 25 BC. A Kandake named Amanirenas led resistance against Roman forces. Ancient Roman sources describe fierce fighting. Rome was extremely powerful in many places. But after the conflict with Kush, Rome agreed to peace terms that were surprisingly good for the Kushites. Kush kept its independence. Rome accepted a stable southern border. Once again, one of the world's greatest empires learned that Kush was not easy to conquer. Trade continued to grow during these centuries. Caravans carried gold, ivory, ebony, incense, enslaved people, exotic animals, leather, and iron across northeastern Africa. Merchants connected the Mediterranean, the Red Sea, Arabia, and Africa south of the Sahara. Goods were not the only things that moved. Ideas moved too. Religions changed and grew. Art developed its own regional style. The Kushites eventually created their own writing system. Today, we call it the Meroitic script. Unlike Egyptian hieroglyphs, Meroitic was used to write the native language of Kush. In the 1900s, scholars learned the sounds of many Meroitic letters, but they still do not fully understand the language itself. Because of this, many surviving inscriptions cannot be completely translated. Imagine finding an ancient library, but only understanding parts of the language. That is the problem historians still face today. Every inscription gives clues, but none gives the full story. Around the 300s AD, the Kingdom of Kush slowly declined. Like most great civilizations, it did not fall because of one simple reason. Trade routes changed. Politics in the region changed. Neighboring kingdoms became stronger. Environmental problems may have hurt farming. Economic networks shifted. Outside conflicts put pressure on royal power. One nearby kingdom, Aksum, located in parts of modern Ethiopia and Eritrea, seems to have played an important role. Inscriptions from Aksumite rulers describe campaigns against peoples in areas once controlled by Kush. But historians still debate how important those campaigns were. Most scholars now believe Kush declined slowly because of many connected problems. Cities gradually lost people. Government power weakened. Royal building projects became smaller. Eventually, Kush disappeared as an independent kingdom. But its people did not disappear. Communities remained across Nubia. Later, new Christian kingdoms rose in many of the same areas. Older traditions mixed with newer cultures. The memory of Kush lived on, even after its political power was gone. For centuries, much of Kushite history stayed buried under desert sand. European travelers sometimes saw the ruins and wrote about them, but many did not understand what they were seeing. Early archaeologists often wrongly thought Kushite monuments were Egyptian. Only careful excavations in the 1800s and 1900s showed how great this civilization truly was. Today, places like Jebel Barkal, Nuri, El Kuru, and Meroe are recognized as some of Africa's greatest archaeological treasures. Archaeologists continue to uncover temples, palaces, workshops, cemeteries, inscriptions, and neighborhoods. Each discovery helps us better understand one of the ancient world's most important kingdoms. Look closely. Every discovery challenges old ideas. For a long time, many history books made it seem like civilization only moved from north to south along the Nile. They made Egypt look like the only great power in the region. But the story of Kush shows something different. Ideas moved both ways. Power moved both ways. Conquest moved both ways. An African kingdom did not simply live beside Egypt. It learned from Egypt. It changed Egyptian traditions. It strengthened them. Then it conquered Egypt itself. The Kushites remind us that ancient Africa was not just watching world history happen. Ancient Africa helped create world history. Their kings ruled as pharaohs, their queens negotiated with Rome, their merchants connected continents, their craftsmen worked iron on a large scale, their builders raised hundreds of pyramids that still stand under the Sudanese sky. And perhaps most amazing of all, the Kushites became great without giving up who they were. They accepted ideas that made them stronger, they kept the traditions that made them unique, and they created a civilization that was African, Nubian, and connected to one of the oldest traditions on Earth. Today, visitors who stand among the pyramids of Meroe often find themselves almost alone. There are no huge crowds like at Giza. There are no endless lines of tourists. There is only the quiet desert wind moving between rows of steep stone pyramids. These pyramids were built by rulers whose names are rarely known outside history books. Yet these monuments are part of the same great story of the Nile. They are the tombs of kings and queens who once ruled Egypt. They are the legacy of an empire that changed northeastern Africa. They are proof that one of history's most remarkable civilizations was not the one most people expected. Long before modern borders divided Egypt and Sudan, the Kushites showed that history along the Nile did not move in only one direction. Sometimes, the empire from the south became the master of the north.